What is up, you guys? This is All Danny Day 1 on the PS4, and I'm going to be giving you a video on the symbols. Or symbol building, I suppose. So, the way this would work is generally you would want to have most of your symbols unlocked. You don't necessarily have to have every single one because you're not going to be using all of your symbols. And it doesn't necessarily mean that even if you have all the symbols unlocked, the last ones are going to be the best. The last ones are not necessarily the best depending on how you build your character and how you want your character to be played as. So when you go to your symbols, you would press start, go to character, and then go down to abilities. And when you're at abilities, you would go to the third tab, which would be symbols. So each class uses each different symbol. Not every class would use the same symbols. Um, so you also have 4 different tabs. You can use these tabs however you would like. You can use one for PvE, you can use one for PvP, you can use it for DPS, support, or tank. The way I have mine set up is I have my first DPS, and then I have my support, then my tank, then my second DPS. So what's going to happen is you have Emblems of Pain, you have Emblems of Destruction, Emblems of Speed, Emblems of Mercy, and Emblems of Protection. I am not sure what's going on with the voting. I'm not even in a group. But anyways, that distracted me for a second. But so this whole row here is your emblems row. And I would say 3 out of the 5 are super useful. So emblems of pain, emblems of mercy, and emblems of protection are the 3 that you would want to kind of look at the most. Don't worry too much about emblems of destruction or emblems of speed. Now, emblems of speed is a really good one as well. It's just that I never had it to actually proc. I've only had it to actually proc one time within the past 2 or 3 hours I've been using it. Or now I'm over exaggerating. I'd say maybe within the 30 minutes of using it or something. I've never seen an emblem drop only but once. So I don't necessarily use this one at all. It would be good for like speed runs, I suppose, but either way, it doesn't really come up amount to as much as Emblems of Mercy or Protection or Emblems of Pain does. So Emblems of Pain and Destruction are somewhat similar. It's just that Destruction detonates as soon as you pick up the emblem. With Emblems of Pain, you pick up the emblem, you can stack it up 3 charges to let it hit a lot harder, or you can just pick up 1 charge and throw it at the enemy. It is a single target ability as well though, so just keep that in mind. With Emblems of Destruction, it's an AoE, and it detonates, like I said, so you have to go over. You'll see the symbol on the ground, you go over it, and then it blows up. So it'll blow up to any nearby enemy. So if you have, I guess, if you're the type of class that's going to be in mid-combat, then Emblems of Destruction might be the better choice. But I still prefer Emblems of Pain because it's a good ability or good emblem to have against bosses. Now, if you're playing support, Emblems of Mercy would probably be a really good one to use, Emblems of Support or Emblems of Protection. I use Protection pretty much on all of my classes though, because of the fact that you get a shield. You get a 10%. You get a shield that absorbs 10% of your max health. So it's going to be good for classes that have mid-range health to high-ranged health. So all the mid-ranged health classes would be something like the Alchemist, Lightbinder, Berserker. I mean not Berserker, the Monk. Oh yeah, the Berserker I guess is like high mid. The Slayer, Archer, Gunner, and Outlaw. Those are mid-ranged classes. Berserker's in between the high and the mid, so the high mid or mid high range health, and then the Revenant, Paladin, and the Knight are the high ranged health. Although all the mage type classes have low ranged health, so Emblems of Protection. I mean, they can still be useful for those classes. Don't get me wrong, but you just won't be getting as much of a good shield as those classes would. But yeah, so the 3 emblems you should be using, in my opinion, would be Mercy, Emblems of Protection, and Emblems of Pain. It can, like I said, you can choose between these 2 though. They're pretty good They're both really good. It's just that one is for single target, one is AoE. The AoE only detonates. You can't pick it up. Next one, we have the dashing symbols. So you have emergency maneuver trap, you have emergency maneuver, trap, and then you have shockwave, emergency maneuver dodge, emergency maneuver breakout, and then you have improved mobility. So I don't use improved mobility on any of the builds, mainly because it gives you 25% more stamina. That's not more resources, it's just stamina for your dashes, and then it gives you 25% more dash increase, like the distance. So I don't really care too much for that. Emergency maneuver breakout is not bad. What it does is it'll stun all the enemies around you, and so that's all it does is it stuns enemies around you when you have that. And then emergency maneuver dodge lets you become immune to all damage, and then you pretty much spawn a shield on top of you, and it lasts for 4 seconds, so you can't be no control effects will work on you, and no damage would hurt you for those 4 seconds. But that's going to be a 24-second cooldown for all the emergency maneuvers are 24-second cooldowns. Emergency maneuver shock is a pretty good one as well for DPS. So if you dash while you have this active, you'll know if you have it active. It'll be on the bottom left corner. It'll just hit an enemy that is nearby, and it'll detonate, like just kind of like how the destruction works, Emblems of Destruction. The way it works is if you dash and you go near an enemy, they get hit by the AoE, which is, like I said, is pretty good. And then for maneuver trap, what this does is it leaves a trap next to where you dashed from. So let's say you dash from point A to point B, the trap will stay at point A. So for any enemy that comes in, it'll hit that bomb and then it'll take damage. So I would say the 2 or the 3 most important ones would probably be the shockwave, dodge, and I wouldn't say trap over breakout, mainly because that extra damage to enemies that go to where you were is gonna be pretty good. So like if you're playing like an outlaw or something, trap would be useful, but I would still prefer shockwave over trap anyways. So it really depends on how you're playing. If you're trying to play more defensively, emergency maneuver dodge would be more useful. If you're trying to play more offensive, then shockwave would be what you're going to want to look for. And then for your defensive, so these are your defensive or your shields or whatever you want to call them. That's what these symbols are for. So you have Divine Intervention, which is something that pretty much everyone uses for obvious reasons. Then you've got Protective Shell, Adaptation, Rising from the Dead, and Homeostasis. Homeostasis, I'm just going to tell you right now, is not good at all, because the good thing about it is you do get health orbs for every 10% health you lose. The bad thing is it reduces the amount of healing you can get from health orbs. So I personally don't like that, because when I tested this out, I was dying a lot faster than I would when I had Divine Intervention, or even when I had Protective Shell at the very least. So with Protective Shell, the next thing which I'm going to go over is, it says for every 10% of health loss, you gain an effect that reduces incoming damage by 40%. Duration of the effect is 6 seconds. So that's going to be super useful for you if you're playing like a tank or whatever, because if you lose 10% health, you get 40% damage reduction. That's going to be super good. That's going to be super noticeable. And I know I'm saying super a lot. It's super great. But yeah, so Protective Shell would definitely be really useful for a tank type character. So would Divine Intervention. But yeah, Protective Shell is going to be really good for you. And it also doesn't stack either, by the way. So if you lose 20% health, you're not going to have 80% damage reduction. you're going to have 40% health damage reduction, and it'll still be for 6 seconds. So if you lose 10% health, and that 6 seconds is about to end, and then you lose another 10% health, it'll go back to 6 seconds. So the timer just resets. So Divine Intervention, incoming damage is completely blocked if it exceeds 10% of the character's max health. The character becomes immune to damage and negative effects for 4 seconds. The effect is activated no more than once in 70 seconds during a single fight. So if you take damage that does more than 10% of your health, then Divine Intervention is going to kick in. You'll be immune to all damage for 4 seconds, but it is a 70-second cooldown. But honestly, like, well, I would say it's more so like a 66-second cooldown because of that 4-second immunity. But you wouldn't really notice that big of a difference of, I mean, not big of a difference, but you wouldn't really notice the Divine Intervention not being procced again, because you shouldn't really be losing 10% health every minute. I mean, you could if you're fighting an enemy that's way above your level, but yeah, I mean, if you are fighting an enemy that can do one-shots, Divine Intervention, not necessarily one-shot, but do a heavy amount of damage, then that Divine Intervention is going to save your life, because you won't take damage and you will have a shield on you that will let you become immune to all damage for 4 seconds. So I put that on a lot of my classes. I have Protective Shell on my tank class though. And then you have Adaptation. Each time you take damage, you gain an effect that reduces incoming damage by 2.5% for 6 seconds. The effect stacks up to 10 times. After 6 seconds, all stacks are removed. So Adaptation is also really good. It's pretty much like having Protective Shell. Actually, no, I think I have this one on my tank. Yeah, I have Adaptation on my tank, not Protective Shell. Because they are pretty much the same thing. They last the same amount. It's just that Protective Shell, you only get that, you get 40% damage reduction though, every 10% health you lose. And then Adaptation, you get, basically can have up to 25% damage reduction anytime you're taking damage. So that'll be super useful to have as well if you're, if you're playing a tank type of class. If you're playing like a Berserker, or you're playing a Knight, or playing a Paladin, Adaptation or Protective Shell, those two are the ones you're going to want to look at. Rising from the Dead, so I haven't actually tried this one out. It says once per fight, the character can resurrect for 25 seconds with 30% of health. So the way I'm thinking that it is when you die, you come back to life, but you're only alive for 25 seconds. You're not going to stay alive, but when you're alive, you're alive for 25 seconds with 30% health. I kind of think that it sucks, to be honest. That's why I don't have this on any of my builds either. The reason why I think it sucks is because you're not even immune to all damage for those 25 seconds. I think what it should be is 25 to 30 seconds of you being alive, and you're immune to all damage, you're immune to all crowd control effects, you're immune to all of that, and your damage should be increased or whatever. Like, you should have like 50% more base damage or something, but after that 25 to 30 seconds, then you go back to being dead. I mean, that would be super useful if you're in a group, But yeah, so in the defense symbols, I would go with either Divine Intervention. If you're a DPS class, Divine Intervention. Or if you're a Glass Cannon class, Divine Intervention. If you're a Revenant or a tank, then Protective Shell or Adaptation are the two you should go with. Now for the, I have no idea what I would call this tree. I guess the support tree, sort of, not necessarily support. But anyways, so you got Pain Shock, you got Wave, Reflective Barrier, Protective Dome, and Honed Technique. So right off the bat, Pain Shock I have used throughout all the way, I used this all the way through Gen 5. Because Gen 5 is when you're going to want to get Honed Technique. But other than that, if you're playing a DPS class or even a support class or tank, Pain Shock is going to help you so much, because it does a lot of damage, but it also stuns the enemy, and it can also knock down the enemy. Now it is a single target attack though. It's not an AoE. Wave, on the other hand, is an AoE attack that slows the enemies down by 50%, but it doesn't knock them down. Which I was like, eh. When I used it, it does proc every 9 seconds though, so that's a good thing. But I personally couldn't get myself to be using it though. I didn't really like it, but I'm not saying it's not a good ability. It is a pretty good ability, a pretty good symbol to have, but I still prefer Pain Shock over Wave. And then you have Reflective Barrier, which Reflective Barrier is a really good tanky ability. Um, I did use this as a tank, but ever since I got Hone Technique, like I said, Hone Technique is going to be is going to be a lot better for you. But you can still use Reflective Barrier because what it does is it pretty much absorbs or reflects 33% of the damage. Or here, actually, let me just read the description so I don't get anyone confused as well as myself. So Reflective Barrier reflects all damage back at the enemies for 8 seconds, but does not allow you to perform any actions and can be interrupted by moving. Maximum amount of reflected damage is 33% of your health. After that, the barrier simply just absorbs incoming damage. So you only reflect 33% of the damage, or 33% of your max health back at your enemies whenever they're dealing damage to you. And after that, you just absorb damage. Um, the only thing I really hated about Reflective Barrier is you were just there for 8 seconds and like cradled up inside an orb. Um, and you can't fight, you can't move, so I didn't really like that. But it does help out a lot with survivability as a tank whenever you're fighting a boss or a bunch of enemies, mainly a boss, and you would use Reflective Barrier so that way they can take the damage that they're dealing to you and you won't take any damage because they can't break your shield, nothing can happen. It's just that after the 8 seconds you have to wait 42 seconds so that way your cooldown is done with Reflective Barrier. And then Protective Dome. So the way Protective Dome works is it's kind of the same way that Reflective Barrier works in a way, in a sense. But it doesn't necessarily give you a protection shield on yourself. So it says Protective Dome reduces damage taken by all your allies in a 12-yard radius, including yourself, by 60%, but does not let you perform any actions and can be interrupted by movement. So I would only really use this on a support type class. I wouldn't necessarily use it on a tank. I mean, you could use it on a tank as well, but I would mainly use it on support because support classes like the Alchemist, well, I mean, you have the Alchemist and the Lightbinder. Those are the only two so far that we know of. We don't know if any future support classes are coming in, but anyways, Protective Dome, the reason why I use this on support classes is because your support class is normally closer to your DPS classes because they have an aura, the support aura, and the support aura will let anyone inside it do more damage. And so if you have Protective Dome within that 12-yard radius, that's pretty much the same size as your support aura. So once you have Protective Dome, make sure you call it out that you have Protective Dome and you're gonna activate it so that your DPSs can go inside it, and maybe even the tank can go inside it, and then they'll be protected by 60% of the damage, or they reduce the damage by 60%. So with Hone Technique, it says enhanced versions of class abilities are triggered more often. So I was kind of confused on what that meant, but when I had this symbol active, I noticed a huge difference between all of my classes, whether it was a support class or DPS or a tank. I normally only have this on my support or even tanks because mainly DPSs because of the fact that all of your enhanced versions of your class abilities they proc a lot more often. So it's anything that procs, pretty much anything that can proc is what this is for. It lets it activate more often. Like there was a time when I was playing the Cryomancer and I had this my square ability or X ability, the one where it's basically auto crit and it summons like a an ice drop, whatever. I have no idea what it's called, but what it does. Actually, let me. This is gonna bother me. I'm just gonna go ahead and go to the Cryomancer. Whoops. And then go to PvP, PvE. So Icy Comet is what it's called. So the Icy Comet, I had that proc like 3 or 4 times in a row because of Hone Technique. Now that was just getting lucky that it did, but most times I mean, yeah, most times stuff won't proc every like maybe 15 seconds or so. But still, it's really good. I would highly recommend using Hone Technique. So with this middle row here, the symbols I would highly recommend using for people would depends on your classes. So for DPSs, Hone Technique and Pain Shock. For tank classes, Reflective Barrier or Hone Technique. For support classes, Protective Dome or Pain Shock. The reason why I'm not, oh no, Hone Technique, yeah, Hone Technique and Protective Dome are the ones you want to go with. I was saying Pain Shock because it could stun the enemy, but then I thought about the Alchemist and I was like, those, the goo ooze guys, whatever, would be super useful to have when you can have Hone Technique proccing that over and over and over. Now we're going to go on to the companion tree or companion symbols. So you have Piercing Formation, Berserker mode, Support mode, Defense mode, and Random Attack. So Random Attack isn't bad. I don't really care for it though because it says Companions attacks now hits all enemies along the line to your main target, inflicting 8.14 million damage. I wouldn't really call that a random attack. I would just call it like a piercing attack because all it does is any enemy that you're fighting, it'll just pierce and it'll pierce that enemy and hit any enemy along the line of it, just like it says. I'm gonna go ahead and skip those, and then I'm gonna go to Piercing Formation. So Piercing Formation says Companion's attack additionally inflicts 9.04 million damage for 3 seconds. So it does damage over time. So I don't know why that's called Piercing Formation, but it does damage over time with Piercing Formation. And then you have Berserker mode. Companion's attack now inflicts 13.6 million more damage, but its target is selected randomly. So Berserker mode should honestly have been called Random Attack because it just randomly selects your enemies. So if you're fighting one enemy, it'll just hit the enemy like across the map or something. Not really. It'll just hit the enemy that's nearby, but a different enemy. And then you have Support mode and Defense mode. Both of these modes are the two that you're going to be using. You're not going to be using any of the other three, to be honest. Obviously, if you don't have these two unlocked, then you're going to have to use one of these two. But if you do, well, if you only have these two unlocked, then I would just go Piercing Formation. But yeah, I would go with Defense mode or Support mode. So the Support mode, this is basically a damage buff. That's what this does. It gives you a 20% damage buff. It only gives one person that though. It can be yourself or any random ally in your group. Now, when it does that, you'll know it does that because it'll put a red aura on you, and it lasts for, I want to say, like maybe 8 seconds with that damage buff. So it's going to be a really nice, when you see that damage buff, that's when you want to start adding up all your other buffs. So if you're playing an alchemist or something, not an alchemist, if you're playing like a berserker and you see that support mode on you, that's when you want to hit that steward's edge or steward something, that giant AoE ring on you that does damage over time that also increases your might by 60%. That's when you're going to want to use that ability. When you see that, I mean, you can use it regardless, but you do even more damage just with that support mode active. With defense mode, it's it summons a shield on the closest, or on the ally that has the lowest amount of health. Now, if you're not in a group, it'll obviously give you the shield, but with this shield, it reduces incoming damage by 50%. So this is going to be super useful for tank classes and also for support classes. if you're support, you can either go defense mode or you can go support mode. Does not matter at all because they're both going to be super useful for you. If you're playing a DPS class, you can go either defense mode or support mode again, because as a DPS, I mean, obviously if you're playing DPS, you want to have support mode in general. You want to have the most damage output that you can put because this is random. If you have defense mode, you never know, you might be the one that might need the shield because you're the one that needs the most, that has the lowest amount of health. Who knows? But yeah, like I said, these two are the ones that you're going to want to choose from. All the others, all the other three are not really that great. The next symbols, which is your special weapons tree, um, it's called, you have Sudden Death, Crushing Aura, Reactive Materials, Sharp Rebuff, and Awakening of Power. So I haven't actually tested Awakening of Power, um, but what the way I've read it is, I mean, okay, so all five of these make use of the special weapon, but it's not just the special weapon. You also make use of it just doing damage itself. So the special weapons, what those are, it's not your divine weapons. The special weapons are weapons that you pick up from enemies. So sometimes you'll see an enemy drop an item or a weapon, whatever. If you pick that up, those are called special weapons. So with these symbols, after it says the special weapon perk, it'll tell you on the bottom of it, the damage is inflicted only if you attack this target for the first time in 30 seconds. So with that, for sudden death, with that being said, you'll be doing 4.92 million damage on the first time you inflict damage. So regardless of you having a special weapon or not, you don't need a special weapon to deal that extra 4.92 million damage or whatever amount of damage you have. But that's going to be every 30 seconds. So sudden death really isn't the most ideal symbol to have if you're using it, if you have all five. Crushing Aura says your attacks using a special weapon have a certain chance to inflict certain chance. So you have a chance of inflicting 4.92 million damage to the enemy with enemy or the energy discharge. I'm pretty sure that's the same thing. Yeah, so it's the same thing with sudden death. You and your allies affected by your support aura may also inflict this damage regardless of whether you have a special weapon or not. So this is going to be something you're going to want to use for your support classes, which would be Crushing Aura, because it's, I mean, it clearly says you and your allies affected by your support aura. So that's what I would use for the support classes, Crushing Aura. Reactive Materials is the same thing as the other two with the first part. The second part, it says enemies that attack you also have a chance to take this damage regardless of whether you have a special weapon or not. So it's just like with sudden death, but sudden death is 30 seconds on the first time you attack. Reactive Materials, it's just you have a chance to inflict that damage while you're doing damage. So it's not 100% guaranteed. It might be like a 1% chance, 50% chance, 20, who knows. But you have a chance of hitting that 4.92 million damage. And then you have Sharp Rebuff. Your attacks using a special weapon have a certain chance to inflict 4.92 million damage as well as the others. So that's pretty much how all of those work. Enemies that apply control effects to you also take this damage. So if there's an enemy that applies control effects or whatever, this would be useful for a tanky type class. So Sharp Rebuff I would use for tanks or Reactive Materials. But yeah, so damage in response to control effects cannot be inflicted more than once in 8 seconds. Awakening of Power. Your other attacks may inflict this damage with a progressively increasing frequency. So Awakening of Power, the way I'm reading it is you basically do more damage. So it's pretty much the same thing as Reactive Materials and Sudden Death, but it's just better. So I guess you could possibly use Awakening of Power, but like I said, I haven't even tried it, so I couldn't tell you how it is. But yeah, so Sharp Rebuff I would say for tank, Crushing Aura for the support, and then either Sudden Death, Reactive Materials, or Awakening of Power for your DPS class. And then for the last symbol, you have Chain of Destruction, Collapse, Block, Black Mark, and Stolen Energy. Stolen Energy is the one I would say right away is what you want to use for any class. Energy Discharge will also apply a shield to you that absorbs 8% of the character's max health. So that right there is good for a tank, it's good for support, and it's good for a DPS. Now, we're going to go to Chain of Destruction. I'm just going to start from the top now. Energy Discharge applies Chain Lightning to the target, which inflicts 3.94 million damage to 6 nearby enemies. I'm pretty sure. Okay, yeah. So, Chain of Destruction, I use this for my Outlaw. I mean, you can use it pretty much for any DPS class, because what it does, you'll know what it does. It'll shoot out. You'll literally see the orbs shoot out the energy discharge, and it'll do a good chunk of damage to the enemies. I like I said, I always use this for my outlaw when I'm using the iron lead or steel lead or something. The spinning ability. Oh, something carousel. Lead carousel is what it's called. So I always use Chain of Destruction for my outlaw. You can use it for a lot of classes that are pretty much AoE, that uses a lot of AoE based attacks, or you can use it for damage over time abilities classes. And then you have Collapse. Energy Discharge will also inflict 7.96 million damage to the affected target over 4 seconds. So this one does damage over time, so it's not too bad. It's good for single target. Block. Energy Discharge will also stun the target for 2 seconds. It's not bad. I wouldn't really care for it though too much. I mean, stun doesn't work that great for bosses, and I mean it does, but it's only 2 seconds. So I mean, although that 2 seconds can save your life, but I wouldn't really worry about it too much. Black Mark. Energy Discharge increases the damage of the next used attack. Energy Discharge increases the damage of the next used attacks used against the affected target. Additional damage that can be inflicted using this effect cannot exceed 15% of your health. So I did actually use Black Mark for a while, but then I ended up switching it back to Chain of Destruction because honestly I prefer Chain of Destruction more because it's nice every time it only works. Energy Discharge only works to enemies that you haven't attacked yet. So it's always first time you attack an enemy on any new enemy. But yeah, I don't really worry too much about Black Mark. Stolen Energy. Oh no, actually, Energy Discharge only works once you get into combat. Now that I remember, it only works when you get into combat. Whenever you're out of combat, it refreshes, and then so on and so on. But yeah, so with this, the last 5 or the last row, I guess the last symbol row, I would go with Stolen Energy and Chain of Destruction or Black Mark, but honestly, Stolen Energy and Chain of Destruction are the 2 best ones you could go with. And then for the very last symbols, you have Iana Sword, Lurde's Sword, Metarchus' Staff, Staff, and then Nerion's Hammer. So Nerion's Hammer I would use for all DPS classes. Any class that does damage is what I would use it for. Every tank class, so you have the Knight and the Paladin, and both support classes, your Lightbinder and Alchemist, I would use Metarchus' Staff. The reason why I'd use Metarchus' Staff is because on the last one it says Last Barrier, consumes the remaining energy and makes all allies invulnerable for 6 seconds. After that, they will not be able to receive the same effect for 40 seconds. So the way I would do this is I would use either Annihilation or Global Annihilation. It doesn't really matter. You have 200 points, I believe, of... you have 200 energy points. So you want to make sure you don't use all of the points for Mark of Annihilation and Global Annihilation, because you want that last barrier for your support classes and your tank classes, so that way when you drop the staff, anyone that's standing within the radius of that staff becomes invulnerable to all damage for 6 seconds. So that right there is going to be super useful for those classes. For the DPS classes, the reason why I'm saying Nerion's Hammer is going to be the best option is because, I mean, the explosion, Incineration is going to do so much damage just for a single target. Fire Wave does pretty good damage as well, but it uses so much charges. I like Incineration, especially when you play as a Revenant. You would use the that L2R1 ability, and then you would use Incineration. You do so much damage, especially when you have the support mode active on yourself as well. Um, but you could also go with Lerde Sword or Aeona Sword. So with Aeona Sword, it gives you 50% damage reduction to yourself while you have the sword active, and then Lerde Sword says the weapon reduces incoming damage by 35% as well. So, but Lerde Sword does more damage than Aeona Sword, but Aeona Sword lets you take less damage. But honestly, I wouldn't really worry about these two. I guess as a tank, you could technically still use Aeona Sword for that 50% damage reduction, but I still would prefer Metarchus' staff. So these are the only two I would recommend using, depending on the classes you're using. So support and tank, Metarchus' staff. DPS is Nerion's hammer. So for my symbols, the way I have my symbols all set up, like I said, the first build or setup is my DPS class. So DPS 1. So I have Emblems of Protection, Emergency Maneuver Dodge, Divine Intervention, Hone Technique, Support Mode, and Reactive Materials, and Stolen Energy. And then I also have Nerion's Hammer. My support class, I believe this is my support. Is this support? Yeah, so my support class, I have Emblems of Mercy, I have Emergency Maneuver Dodge, Divine Intervention, Protective Dome, Support Mode. You can either have support or defense, it doesn't really matter. Crushing Aura, and Stolen Energy, also with Metarchus' staff. And then for my tank class, actually need to change Divine Intervention out with Adaptation. Alright. So with the tank, I go with Emblems of Protection, Emergency Maneuver Dodge, Adaptation, Hone Technique, or Reflective Barrier, Defense Mode, Reactive Materials, Stolen Energy, and then I got Metarchus' staff. And then my second DPS, I have Emblems of Protection, Emergency Maneuver Dodge, Homeostasis. What? No, I don't. Homeostasis. My bad, you guys. I think I forgot to change that. Divine Intervention is what I have, not Homeostasis. Divine Intervention, Hone Technique, Support Mode, Awakening of Power, and Chain of Destruction, and then I have Nerion's Hammer. So, and by the way, I didn't mean to have Homeostasis on. I had that when I was testing it, and then I guess I forgot to change it. But yeah, that's pretty much it with the symbols. Sorry that this was a pretty long video. I didn't really mean to make it this long, but I just wanted to make sure you guys understood why I chose these specific symbols and what symbols you could technically go with. You don't necessarily have to follow my my symbol build. You can just go with your own, but this is just to show you what the symbols do, explain what they do, and yeah. So if this video helped you at all, go and leave a like, comment, subscribe. If you have any other questions or concerns, let me know down in the comment section, or you can follow me at Twitter at alldailyday1 and ask me there. If you want to see any other type of videos, if you want to see specific things, let me know also down in the comment section. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So this is All Day Any Day 1 on the PS4. Have a good day, good night, and peace.